welcome to the latest episode of Inside 340B Report. I'm Ted Slafsky, publisher and CEO of 340B Report, and I'm joined today by Associate Editor and Senior Writer Will Newton. Hello, Will.
How's it going, Ted? Excited to be here.
Good. And our national correspondent, Bella Czajkowski. How are you, Bella?
Good, Ted. I'm excited for our episode.
Good. Our other associate editor slash senior writer, Shannon Young, is lucky to be on vacation this week, so she doesn't have to work, and we are going to sort of fill in some of the things that she usually covers, but we're happy for her. And we're recording early this week on Tuesday, March 11th, so I can fly into Providence, Rhode Island to spend time with my mom and my brother. So I'm excited to go and see her and my brother who's coming in from California. So with that, we'll go ahead and get this episode going. And you will be getting a recording of this episode sooner than usual. It usually comes out on Monday. I suspect since it's a Tuesday today, you'll probably get it on Thursday. So just keep that in mind as we discuss the events. Today, we're going to start by discussing a series of recent important votes on state 340B legislation and some of the efforts certain groups are making to oppose those bills. Next, we're going to talk about some of the key developments in the ongoing litigation over drugmaker 340B rebate proposals. And finally, we're going to discuss key budget talks taking place in Congress and what 340B stakeholders should keep an eye on, particularly with a potential government shutdown quickly approaching. And with that, let's start on the state level. Will, can you tell us about some of the most important recent votes that you've covered in the various state houses? It does seem like you have written 7 or 8 breaking news stories or news alerts in the last few weeks, so there's a lot going on.
Yeah, certainly. There's been a ton going on at the state level. And the most common type of state 340B legislation we've been seeing have been bills that would prohibit drug makers from restricting 340B contract pharmacy access. So going into the year, 8 states had already enacted contract pharmacy access laws. And so far in 2025, more than 20 other states have introduced new bills. But the biggest votes so far have been in Utah and South Dakota, where pretty recently contract pharmacy access bills actually passed both legislative chambers pretty overwhelmingly and are now moving to the governor's desks. So in South Dakota, the governor actually received the contract pharmacy access bill on Monday, March 10th, and will now have 5 business days to act on it, so to either sign or veto it. In Utah, they're still going through a couple procedural technicalities, and the bill will be reaching the governor's desk soon there as well. So those are the state bills that are by far the closest to actually becoming laws. Also seen several states where one legislative chamber has passed a contract pharmacy access bill and it's now being considered in the opposite chamber. So those states would be Hawaii, Michigan, Kentucky, and North Dakota. Some other states that we're really keeping our eyes on because there's been some committee activity and there could be big votes soon would be Nebraska, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Colorado are pretty active there as well. Yeah, so the other type of state 340B bill we've been seeing that's been pretty common, although not quite as common as the contract pharmacy access bills, have been 340B provider reporting bills. So 3 states going into the year had previously enacted 340B provider reporting bills. So they require covered entities to report certain information about how they generate and use their 340B savings. And so far this year, 10 other states have introduced 340B provider reporting bills. So in 3 states, there have actually been important votes where a full legislative chamber has passed the bill and sent it to the opposite chamber for consideration. So those states being Indiana, Michigan, and Idaho. Now, the scope of these laws vary pretty considerably. So in Michigan, on one end of the spectrum, you have pretty more limited reporting requirements and that are also paired alongside contract pharmacy access provisions and manufacturer reporting requirements. So what you're seeing in Colorado is a little more similar to what providers have seen in the main law that's already been enacted. And on the other hand of the spectrum, the bills being considered in Indiana and Idaho are much more extensive in terms of what kind of information they ask covered entities to provide, and pretty similar to the Minnesota law that's already in effect there. So those are the two main types of bills that we've been following. And going back to the contract pharmacy access bills, while there has been a lot of success, and I outlined some of the biggest votes there, there's also been some opposition efforts to some of those bills. And so I know, Bella, could you tell us a little bit about what some of these opposition efforts have looked like?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll take over for Shannon here, who's done some good reporting on this recently. There's an organization called Building America's Future based out of DC, a dark money group. It's a 501c4 nonprofit organization, which means they do not have to disclose their donors. And it's produced a series of ads this year that we've had our attention on. You've probably seen our coverage on, including billboards outside of state houses that were pretty high profile. That tied gender affirming care for youth, for trans youth, to the 340B program. And it seemed that these billboards were an attempt to dissuade GOP lawmakers in the state houses that they were parked outside of from supporting contract pharmacy access bills in their state, sometimes even during the hearings as they were taking place. The most recent ad from this organization that we've seen was about a 30-second video calling GOP lawmakers that are in Kentucky, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Tennessee in supportive of contract pharmacy access bills in those states, quote, Trump underminers, and calling for them to let Trump reform 340B. We talked to some of the lawmakers who sponsored these bills or co-sponsored these bills, and they told 340B Report that they were shocked by the ads, calling them false and misleading. Meanwhile, in Oklahoma, some lawmakers there in both the Senate and the House have mentioned that there are dark money influences, advocacy attempts, sending text messages, videos, trying to spread these falsehoods about the 340B program and what it accomplishes, and refuting them in the name of these contract pharmacy access bills. One House member said that the claims were despicable and demonstrably false. Still, though, many of the targeted states with these ads, the states these ads have targeted, have advanced their bills. So efforts by these dark money groups may be backfiring.
Yeah, I would agree with you there, Bella. I mean, I listened to some of that testimony and discussion in Oklahoma, and it looks like many of the state lawmakers are quite upset with the tactics being used to try to undermine these contract pharmacy bills. And there appears to be a lot of support among the lawmakers in both chambers in Oklahoma and some of these other red states to try to get these enacted. And my understanding, Will, that you may have some breaking news in one of those red
Yeah,
states.
so I just sent the rest of our team a message, but some breaking news right now that actually happened in the time between when I was talking about South Dakota 5 minutes ago and now is that the South Dakota governor signed their contract pharmacy access bill. So South Dakota is now the ninth state to have passed a contract pharmacy access law and the first state to do so this year. So right after finishing recording, we'll be writing up a news alert or breaking news alert that all of our subscribers will have gotten by the time the podcast came out. But this is certainly a really big development. I'd reached out to the governor's office after I saw he had officially received the bill and just got word that the bill was signed. So definitely when we're talking about these state bills, it's a really big development because 6 laws were signed last year. This is the first law to be signed this year, and there were potentially others to follow. So definitely keep all of our readers posted on that.
Yeah, that's really helpful information, Will. And keep in mind, everyone, that it is also the state where Senator John Thune is located. And perhaps this may slow down the momentum for a bipartisan federal bill if more and more states are able to enact these what would we describe as stronger protections than may be enacted at that federal level. So stay tuned. But thank you so much, Will. And I'm sorry to hear that on a sunny day in Washington where it's 70 degrees, you will not be able to go for your jog after this recording.
Yep, we'll have that breaking news alert out to our subscribers soon.
Okay, great. Thank you. I know there's also been a lot of discussions lately on the litigation front. Can we talk a little bit about what's going on there? I know there have been some important developments in the rebate model initiative that the drug companies have been trying to get implemented. I think that's something that Bella, are you covering that?
Yeah, so both Bella and I can
Sorry.
tackle this together. So to start out, yeah, there have been some important developments in the litigation over drug maker rebates. So as most of our listeners know, 5 different drug companies now have sued the federal government in an attempt to implement a 340B rebate model. So HRSA, the federal agency that oversees the 340B program, maintains that the 340B statute prohibits drug makers from implementing 340B rebate models without agency approval. HRSA has not approved any of these 5 drug maker rebate proposals and threatened some pretty significant enforcement action against a couple of them that were, showing plans to actually go forward and implement them. So these 5 drug makers all sued the federal government. And right now, how the cases have been is it's been, right, the drug makers on one side filing the lawsuits and then the federal government on the other side defending them. Now, obviously, the implications of whether or not these rebate models get approved would have enormous consequences for covered entities. But up until this point, covered entities had not really been directly involved in the cases. So if you're an outside party that wants to get involved in litigation, you basically have 2 main ways of doing so. One is by filing an amicus or a friend of the court brief, where basically you just sort of put in a filing in the court case to help support one of the sides. The judge reads it. It's part of the official court filings, etc. The other more intensive way to get involved is to attempt to intervene in the case and join on as a party to the case. And the really big news recently is that a federal district judge that's overseeing 4 of the 5 rebate lawsuits has approved 340B Health's motion to intervene in those cases. So 340B Health is a large hospital trade group that represents 340B hospitals. And now that their motion to intervene has been granted, they are officially joining on to the case as a party. So that means that attorneys for 340B Health will be, arguing alongside HRSA at oral arguments. They can file motions for summary judgment, motions to dismiss, and be very actively involved in that respect. Also, they would have the ability to appeal any judicial ruling, even if the federal government itself does not choose to appeal. So this is definitely really important, especially considering some of the uncertainty surrounding the new administration. There's been a lot of changes in priorities of the new administration and some back and forth there. So we now know that for sure, whichever stance and no matter how vigorously or not vigorously the federal government chooses to defend its longstanding position that drug makers can't unilaterally implement rebates, a provider advocacy group will be at the forefront of that case and doing a lot of legal work there. So that's certainly important. Similarly, some other provider groups have been assisting the government through amicus briefs. And I know Bella wrote an awesome article about that pretty recently, and you can tell us some more about that.
Yeah, of course. So the American Hospital Association and multiple other provider trade organizations have filed a series of amicus briefs recently in support of the federal government's position, which, as Will mentioned, is in opposition to drug maker rebate models. And these briefs are all pretty similar, even though there are multiple of them filed in different ongoing drug maker suits. But the bottom line is they said rebates would harm safety net hospitals, especially in rural and urban communities. The groups go on to condemn what they call a quote self-help strategy by drug makers to reform the 340B program, saying that they quote cannot take the law into their own hands and then seek judicial permission for their extra legal actions. So it's obviously pretty powerful there. So that's the the provider side. Like the majority of the large 340B provider trade groups signed onto those amicus briefs. But meanwhile, there are some drug industry funded patient advocacy groups like CF United and the AIDS Drug Assistance Programs, or ADAP Advocacy Association, which have also filed briefs in support of the rebate model, so the opposite. But it is important to note that PhRMA, the drug industry trade group, has funded ADAP Advocacy Association in the past, according to the trade group's tax filings in 2023.
Yeah, and there are other groups representing AIDS drug assistance programs, including NASDAD, that certainly have not weighed in support of changing the way the program works. Although they do have a unique program for the AIDS drug assistance programs. It's actually the only exception to the rule about upfront discounts, because some ADAP programs could not access the program that way. But that was something that was approved by the HHS secretary. So that'll be really interesting, Bella, to keep an eye on those cases. That's going to be critically important. And it will also be really important to see whether the new administration follows longstanding policy that requires approval by the HHS secretary for anything like a rebate model, which would be a huge change to the way the 340B program has worked for 30 years. And I know the providers are quite worried and upset about any effort to make this dramatic change. Okay, with that, I think we're going to go ahead and take a minute to hear about today's sponsor. Thank you.
Struggling with your 340B TPA? PharmaForce delivers unmatched claims visibility, reporting capabilities, and configuration control. With our 97% customer retention rate, it's clear why leading covered entities trust our solutions. From 340B grantees to academic medical centers, we're setting a new standard for 340B management. The switch is easier than you think. Visit thepharmaforce.com to get started. PharmaForce, finally 340B your way.
Now we're going to close by talking a little bit about Congress and the federal budget and some of the 340B implications there. So Ted, I know you've been covering and involved in the 340B program for a couple decades now. What are sort of the biggest things you think that 340B stakeholders should be keeping their eyes on as these budget talks progress?
Right. So this week there's a deadline to pass legislation to keep the government going, and so it doesn't shut down. I mean, I would expect that will end up getting passed. It won't be easy, but that will be important to keep everything going, from the economy to everything else that's the government's involved in. But the big picture is this big reconciliation bill, which calls for $880 billion in cuts in federal health care programs. It sounds like Medicaid is the number one target, and that, of course, is the insurer of many patients that are served by 340B providers. So those cuts could be quite devastating for providers in the 340B program. And could result in more closures of rural hospitals, among other challenges. So it's important to keep an eye on that. And then, of course, keep an eye on the 340B program. We will get more focus on the program in the coming months, particularly since the chair of the Senate committee that has jurisdiction over 340B has been a critic of the 340B program, as well as the chair of the health subcommittee overseeing 340B in the House. That would be Buddy Carter. has raised significant concerns and has proposed legislation in the last session of Congress that would be quite detrimental, particularly to the hospitals in the program. So we've got a lot of moving parts here, and it'll be really interesting to see. But I think in the short term, we should expect most of the focus to be on trying to get these budget cuts done and these tax cuts extended, which is the number one goal of President Trump and the Republicans in Congress. And that won't be easy because some of these cuts are going to have real life impact on not only healthcare providers, but the patients that are being served, including a lot of folks who voted for GOP lawmakers. So keep an eye on all of that. It's going to be really interesting to see how that progresses. And I think with that, we'll probably wrap up for today's episode. I do want to thank both Will and Bella for their insights. And I know that we'll look forward to seeing Shannon on the next podcast. But in the meantime, it sounds like, Will, you have to file a story, and we need to get back to our day jobs. So with that, we'll call it a day. And thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. Goodbye. 340B Report is your indispensable source for news and intelligence on the 340B program. We are pleased to offer a special discount of 25% off for first-time subscribers. Go to the subscribe tab at 340breport.com and use coupon code podcast25. I know you will find our news service to be a valuable investment. Thank you.